Hello, everyone, and welcome to this important episode of Ignition Time. Thank you so much for being a viewer and a subscriber. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda. If you don't know anything about me, here's a little bit of information about me so you know a little bit about my journey, who I am, and why you should listen to me. Thank you so much for being a viewer and a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber yet, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Please enable notifications. That really helps out the channel. That helps out the YouTube algorithm. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the Crusader for the American middle class, Bernie Sanders from Vermont. There he is. What's up, Bernie? I hope you're doing well. Now, this independent senator from Vermont played a very important role in the passage of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. And I believe Bernie is going to play a very important role in the passage of the next $3 trillion infrastructure plan, the Build Back Better agenda. In a very interesting interview with the New York Times, with Ezra Klein from the New York Times, Bernie Sanders essentially revealed a lot of the internal dynamics that take place in DC. Remember, this channel, the Ignition Time channel, is about the country, the economy, as well as your money. Now, in the first segment with Bernie Sanders in this extremely interesting interview, this was an audio interview. By the way, you'll get a link to this incredible New York Times article featuring Bernie Sanders in the description section below. So make sure you check out that entire article and check out the New York Times article in the description section below. But in the first part of this interview, which I felt was very interesting, and by the way, I'm going to highlight what I felt were the most important aspects of this interview, so you don't have to listen to the whole thing if you don't want to. But Bernie Sanders was specifically asked how much unity is there within the Democrats, because we have the conservative senator from West Virginia, the conservative Democrat Joe Manchin, who negotiated with the president, and that is why the unemployment benefits went down from $400 a week to $300 a week. That's why there was an income threshold for the $1,400 stimulus checks. In fact, Bernie Sanders was specifically asked, there's a lot of coverage about potential friction amongst the Democrats in the Senate involving Joe Manchin, the conservative Democrat from West Virginia, and Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona. Are the Democrats united, or are they less united now compared to how they were in the past? Very interesting response from Bernie Sanders. Let's listen closely to exactly what Bernie says to the New York Times in his interview with Ezra Klein. Let's roll the audio and listen in to Bernie Sanders, the one and only. Let's watch.
There's a lot of coverage, as there always is, about potential friction in the Democratic caucus in the Senate, differences between, say, a Senator Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and others. Do you find the caucus to be united on strategy more or less than in the past?
Well, obviously you got 50 people. And when you have 50 people, the crazy situation is that any one person could prevent us from moving forward. But I think, and I hope, that there is an understanding that despite our differences, and some of these differences are significant, we have got to work with the President of the United States, who I think is prepared to go forward aggressively in a number of issues, that we cannot sabotage the needs of the American people. So any one person really has enormous power. But I would hope that by definition, when you are a member of a caucus, you fight for what your views are within the caucus. But at the end of the day, nobody is going to get everything they want. I did not get everything that I want in the American Rescue Plan. Others did not get everything they wanted. But at the end of the day, we have got to go forward together because we need to be united. And I think there is a widespread understanding about the importance of that.
Now, I consider this next segment to be even more important and even more interesting because I do believe in the importance of bipartisanship. Look, folks, the Democrats will not always agree with the Republicans, and the Republicans are going to disagree with the Democrats. That is the nature of our government. But I believe what happened on the 6th of January was extremely divisive. And if you remember, the senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley, he actually contested the results of the election. And this was a very, very, very highly controversial subject at that time. And for many of us, it still is. Now, Bernie was specifically asked about his relationship with Josh Hawley in the next segment of this interesting interview. He was asked, let's talk about the dynamics on Capitol Hill. A few months ago, you were working closely with Josh Hawley on trying to get another stimulus check. And he said that Josh Hawley voted against the election. That's what Ezra Klein from the New York Times pointed out. How has this changed your relationship with Josh Hawley? Fascinating response from Bernie Sanders. Let's roll the audio. I want you to listen for yourself and be the judge. Let's listen.
Let's talk about the dynamics between the parties right now. You mentioned the preference for bipartisanship. A few months ago, you were working with Senator Josh Hawley on bigger stimulus checks. That was a very effective project. It ended up, pushing in Georgia and potentially winning Democrats Georgia. But then Senator Hawley votes against certifying the election. He raised his fist to the mob that stormed the Capitol. How have your relationships with Republicans changed in the aftermath of January 6th?
Well, I don't want to get into personalities here, but this is what I would say, and I think it's a very sad state of affairs. Obviously, in the last many years, only accelerated by Donald Trump, the Republican Party has moved not only very far to the right, but moved in the direction of authoritarianism. When you have a president of the United States saying a month before the election that the only way he could lose that election is if it was stolen from him. And when after the election, and he lost the election, he says, obviously it was stolen. And you have now a very significant majority of Republicans who believe that that election was stolen. So you have a very, very difficult issue of large numbers of Americans who have given up, I think, on democracy. That is where many Republicans are. During the impeachment trial, I asked the attorney for Trump a simple question. I said, did Trump win the election? And he got all phased, all upset about that. But you got a lot of Republican senators, members of the House, who are refusing even today to say that Joe Biden won a fair and square election. So you got a whole lot of problems, and that's on my mind, and it's one of the issues that as a nation, as a Democratic Party, we've got to address.
Now, the next segment of this interview is fascinating because the interviewer asked Bernie Sanders if the Republican Party had changed its focus away from economic issues, because traditionally the Republicans are very focused on economics, very focused on business, very focused on long-term economic prosperity. And he was asked by the interviewer, hey, are the Republicans losing their focus? Again, it's very interesting to ask an independent from Vermont who generally votes with the Democrats if the Republicans are losing their focus. But Bernie is a very interesting character. He's an individual who speaks his mind. He is a politician, but in many ways, he's also not a traditional politician because he tends to walk around with his heart on his sleeve, and he is extremely popular. Let's listen to the response from Bernie Sanders about whether the Republicans are losing their focus on the economy as a party more so recently than they were in the past. Let's roll the audio and listen to what Bernie had to say about the focus of the Republican Party as far as our economy is concerned. Let's listen.
Do you think a byproduct of the way the Republican Party has changed is that it's less unified and puts less emphasis on economic issues than it used to? I was struck by how much more energized Republicans were the week that the American Rescue Plan passed by the debate over Dr. Seuss's books than by this $1.9 trillion spending bill.
Look, what you have is the energy in the Republican Party, their grassroots support, has nothing to do with tax breaks to the rich. Republicans are not going into the streets, the Trump Republicans saying, we need more tax breaks for the rich. We need more deregulation. We need to end the Affordable Care Act and throw 30 million people off the health care. That is not what they're talking about. What Trump understood, as demagogues often do, and he's not unique, it's going on all over the world, is we are living in a very rapidly changing world. And there are many people, most often older white males, but not exclusively, who feel that they're losing control of the world that they used to dominate. And that has to do with patriarchy, it has to do with sexism, it has to do with racism, xenophobia, and homophobia. And that is where the energy is. The energy essentially is somebody like Donald Trump says, we are going to preserve the old way of life, where older white males dominated American society. We're not going to let them take that away from us. And that is where their energy is. One of the gratifying things, I don't know if you saw this, Ezra, but in terms of polling on the American Rescue Plan, very interesting. It had a good number, a decent amount of Republican support. I don't know, was it 35, 40%? But among what they called lower income, working class Republicans, that number was 63%. So I think that our political goal in the coming months and years is to do everything we can, and we saw how great the people in Georgia did in this respect, reach out to young people, reach out to people of color, reach out to all people who believe in economic and social justice, but also reach out aggressively to working class Republicans and tell them, no, we're not going to throw 30 million people off the health care that they had. We're not going to give tax breaks to the rich. You know what we are going to do? We're going to make sure that you and your children will have a decent standard of living. We're going to raise the minimum wage for you. We're going to make it easier for you to join a union. We're going to make sure that healthcare in America is a human right. We're going to make sure that if we do tax breaks, you're going to get them and not the billionaire class. And I think we have a real opportunity to pick up support in that area. And if we can do that, if you can get 10% of Trump's support and grow our support by addressing the real issues that our people feel are important, you're going to put together a coalition that is not going to lose a lot of elections.
Now, if you thought that was interesting, I believe this final segment gets to the heart of the matter in terms of why we are divided as a country. I've said this before on our channel. For me, it's not about the red or the blue. It's about the red, white, and blue. I'm not Democrat. I'm not Republican. I'm American. We are all Americans first. This is a fascinating question because Bernie was specifically asked, how do you deal with voters? How do you reconcile the conundrum that voters are facing who may agree with the Democrats and say, hey, you know, those who are the most vulnerable amongst us need more help. The rich need to be taxed more. But these what do you do about these voters if they are culturally concerned about things like taking away their guns and so on and so forth? This is where we get into highly sensitive subjects. And I think Ezra Klein from the New York Times did an excellent job framing the question. He specifically said, how do you talk to voters who are actually worried about those direct questions, who may agree with the Democrats on the economic side, but are worried that the Democrats are going to take things that they culturally care about and take those things away from them? And this, I think, gets to the heart of the matter. I thought this was an outstanding question, and I thought the response from Bernie was even more telling. Let's roll the audio and listen to a response to what I think is one of the most fascinating questions ever asked to any politician, let alone a non-traditional politician like Bernie Sanders. Let's roll the audio and listen.
Let me pick up on that. So the Republican strategy right now, to your exact point, is to go to these people and say, the Democrats, the liberals, they want to take away things that are culturally important to you. One version is to take away your power, but another version is take away your Dr. Seuss books. Liberals have become too censorious. They suppress ideas and products that offend them. They look down on you culture. They want to take away your guns. They want to make it so your kids can't go to religious school. There's the strategy of emphasizing economic issues, but how do you talk to voters who are actually worried about those direct questions, who may agree with Democrats on the economic side, but are worried the Democrats are going to take things they culturally care about?
It's a good question, and no one that I know has a magical answer to it. I do think that addressing economic issues is helpful. It's not the 100% solution. As you know, you got the QAnon people who telling their supporters that Democrats, I'm not sure what the latest particular thing is, kill babies and eat their brains or something. Is that the latest thing that we're supposed to be doing? I don't know. But, when people who are in trouble suddenly receive a check for $500, $600 for a family of four, when their unemployment is extended, when they get health care that they previously did not have, when they're better able to raise their child, it's not going to solve all of these cultural problems by a long shot. But it begins maybe to open the door and say, well, you know what? This is good. Trump didn't do this for us. And maybe these Democrats are not as bad as we thought that they were. And I think it's going to take a lot of work. These cultural issues, I don't know how you bridge the gap. You have people who are fervently anti-choice, and I'm not sure that you are going to win many of them over. But I think what we have got to do is do what I'm afraid the Democrats have not always done in the past. And that is treat people with respect. I come from one of the most rural states in America, and I lived in a town of 200 people for a couple of years. And I think there is not an appreciation of rural America, the values of rural America, the sense of community that exists in rural America. And somehow or enough, the intellectual elite does have, in some cases, a contempt for the people who live in rural America, work hard. And I think we've got to change that attitude and start focusing on the needs of people in rural America, treat them with respect, and understand there are areas there are going to be disagreements. But We can't treat people with contempt.
So that was it, everyone. A fascinating interview with Bernie Sanders from Vermont. Let me know what you thought of essentially the unity or the lack of unity amongst the Democrats. The new fractured relationship, the friction-filled relationship with the Republicans, and the future focus of the Republican Party as far as Bernie is concerned, as well as concerns that voters have who may side economically with the Democrats but who are fundamentally concerned about what the Democrats might take away from them, might take away some of our liberties, some things that are part of the fabric of us as Americans. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda. Once again, here is some information about me. You'll learn a little bit more about who I am, what my journey has been like, and why you should listen to me. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. I assure you, Bernie, there he is. What's up, Bernie? Clicks the like button whenever he watches Ignition Time. And his best friend, Josh Hawley from Missouri, the Republican from Missouri. What's up, Josh? Josh also clicks the like button when he watches Ignition Time. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. One last time, please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.